12 minutes. That's how long it took to go from biggest win of his career to the back of a police car. Same parking lot, same building, same man who just convinced a jury to deliver justice. Now a police officer has him in handcuffs. The judge saw it happen, walked back inside, said nothing. Because in this country, it doesn't matter what you've built, doesn't matter what you've proven, doesn't matter what your title says on the door. A cop looks at you and he's already decided. The cuffs clicked shut at 2:53 p.m., and the system that was supposed to protect him watched. The parking lot was empty when they brought him out. Elijah Cross walked through the side door of Central Division, with his wrists still carrying the faint red marks from the cuffs and the afternoon light hitting him wrong, and a parking validation sticker visible on his windshield from 30 feet away. He could see it from here. Yellow, centered, exactly where he'd put it at 7:40 that morning. He stood on the asphalt for a moment. Then he got in his car and drove home. That was the end of it. Or the beginning, depending on where you started the story. Most people would start it at the parking lot. At the moment, Raymond Briggs stepped out of the patrol unit and walked across the asphalt with his hand near his belt and his mind already made up. But the story actually started 11 minutes before that. 11 minutes. That was how long the jury was out. Elijah had been standing at the prosecution table when the foreperson read the verdict. Hargrove Pharmaceutical, 3 years of work, 6 weeks of testimony, 400 pages of financial records proving that the company had been lying, systematically and deliberately, to sick people who could not afford to fight back. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom broke open. Noise everywhere. Reporters moving fast toward the exits. Defense attorneys leaning into each other, whispering in the compressed, urgent way of people recalculating what comes next. Someone touched Elijah's shoulder from behind and said something he didn't catch. He was already buttoning his jacket. He shook hands with the defense lead, a woman named Patrice Holloway, who had fought hard and fair and lost clean, and she nodded at him with a particular respect that courtrooms teach you, the kind you don't perform. Judge Owen Holt rapped the gavel. Proceedings concluded. Elijah picked up his briefcase and walked out. The afternoon hit him like wall, that specificest kind of summer heat that collects in courthouse parking lots, radiating up from the asphalt and pressing down from above at the same time. No shade, no wind, just concrete and parked cars and the smell of hot metal baking in the sun. He reached into his left jacket pocket. Nothing. He stopped walking. Left pants pocket, right jacket, inside breast. He went hand through each one the way you do when you're certain you put something somewhere, and your hands just aren't confirming it yet. No wallet. He stood still for a moment, ran back through the morning. He'd had it at the coffee counter. He remembered the specific resistance of the snap closure on the leather, remembered the exact transaction. So it was somewhere between there and here, the courthouse or the car. He walked to the car, the black SUV. Third row of the public lot, parked exactly where he'd left it at 7:40 that morning. The parked right validation store was on the windshield. So yellow, bright. He unlocked it, opened the driver's side door, leaned in and started with the obvious places first. Center console, cup holders, the gap between the seat and the door panel. He moved to the floor, reached under the seat. His fingers moved through the dark, past receipts and a protein bar wrapper and something that might have been pen. He kept looking. He was not panicking. It was a wallet. It would either be here or it wouldn't, and either way he knew his own name and where he worked. But he kept looking. Raymond Briggs had been doing his job for 22 years. He would have told you he knew how to read a parking lot, how to read the way people moved through spaces, what nervous looked like versus guilty versus just having a bad day. He was sitting 30 meters away in the patrol unit, engine idling, paperwork on the dash, coffee going cold in the cup holder. He looked up, saw a man leaning into a black SUV, black man. Well-dressed suit jacket, dress shirt, leaning in the way you lean when you're looking for something, or taking something. Briggs looked at the windshield. There was a parking validation sticker on it, yellow, centered. He could see it clearly from where he was sitting. He looked at it for a moment. Then he opened the car door. Elijah heard the boots on the asphalt before he heard the voice. He straightened, turned around. The officer was already close. Older white man, medium build, the kind of face that had held the same expression for so long it had settled there, permanently. Hand not on the weapon. near the belt. Step away from the vehicle. Elijah stepped back, kept his hands where they could be seen. He'd been doing this since he was 17 years old, when his father sat him down at the kitchen table and explained the geometry of these moments with the specificity of a man who had watched them go wrong too many times. Hands visible, voice calm, no sudden movements, not because you're wrong, because being right doesn't always protect you fast enough. Can I ask what the problem is? This your car? Yes. I'm looking for my wallet. I set it down somewhere this morning, and I'm trying to locate it. You have ID? My ID is in my wallet, which is what I'm trying to find. Briggs looked at the car, then back. The registration, anything? The registration is in the glove box. I can get it. Don't reach into the vehicle. Stopped, he breathed. Okay. The word came out flat, measured. The voice he used in front of juries when he needed them to feel exactly how careful he was being. My name is Elijah Cross. I am the state's attorney for this county. This is my vehicle. I have been parking in this lot since 2009. If you run the plates, you will have everything you need in under a minute. Briggs looked at him, and the corner of his mouth did something. Not quite a smile. Something that had already decided how this conversation was going to go. That's a new one, he said. There was a moment, a very specific moment, 3 seconds long, maybe less. The kind that somehow takes up more space than it should. Elijah Cross stood in a courthouse parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in a suit that cost more some people's rent, with a briefcase he'd set down 6 feet away, and a parking sticker clearly visible on his windshield, and he watched Raymond Briggs reach for the handcuffs. He knew before the hand moved. The body registers certain things a half second before the mind catches up. He knew the way you know a door is about to open, the way you know weather is changing. He could have said more. He had 12 forms of identification waiting in a glove box 3 feet away. He could recite out his bar number from memory. He could call Owen Holt and have him on the phone in under 2 minutes. He could have named every judge in this building by first name and length of tenure. None of it would matter, because Briggs had already decided. Not here, not in the 30 seconds since he'd gotten out of the patrol car. Before that, he'd looked at one thing and made a judgment, and everything Elijah said after that was just noise getting in the way of a conclusion that had already been reached. The cuffs clicked, cold metal. Right wrist first. Elijah did not move, did not resist. Let it happen the way his father had taught him to let it happen, in the kitchen at 19 with bad coffee, and a voice that was careful because the information was important. Stay calm. Don't give them a reason. The truth will sort it out. He had believed that for 25 years. He still believed it, but it was harder than it used to be. He was being walked toward the patrol car when the door opened, the side entrance, the one that court staff used. Elijah knew it without looking. He'd used it hundreds of times. Knew the exact weight of it, the resistance of the handle, the particular sound the latch made. He heard it open. He looked. Judge Owen Holt stood in the doorway, 60 years old, gray at the temples. Still in his robes, the collar loosened the way he always loosened it between sessions. He'd been doing that since Elijah first tried a case in his courtroom back in 2011. Holt saw him. Elijah saw Holt see him. There was a fraction of a second, less than that, something too fast to fully register, where their eyes met across 30 feet of parking lot asphalt, where it was completely clear that the judge understood what he was looking at. A man he had known for over a decade, a man whose name was on the verdict form still cooling on his bench inside, a man who 40 minutes ago had stood in his courtroom and argued a case to its conclusion. Being walked to a patrol car, in handcuffs. Holt stood there, one breath, two, and then he stepped back inside. The door swung shut behind him. The latch clicked. Elijah got into the back of the patrol car. He didn't say anything on the drive to the station because there was nothing left to say to Raymond Briggs, and because he was thinking about the expression on Owen Holt's face, and because the marks on his wrists were already starting, and because somewhere in his car there was a wallet with his ID in it. And this was all going to resolve itself within the hour. And by tomorrow morning, none of it would technically matter. He told himself that. Several times. The station smelled the way all stations smell. Industrial, cleaner, and old coffee, and something underneath both of those things that Elijah had never been able to name but had always recognized. He'd been inside stations like this dozens of times, always on the other side of the processing desk. Briggs walked him through the intake procedure without hurrying. That was the thing about it. Every step had a form. Every form had a box. Every box got filled in, and the machinery kept to him, and it didn't want to slow down to ask who you were. Suspicion of vehicle theft. The words going into the boxes. Officer Brett Calloway was at the terminal nearest the processing area. 28 years old. 2 years on the job. He had the look of someone still reconciling the job I thought I'd taken with the job he'd actually taken. Still figuring out where those two things diverged and whether the gap could be closed. He looked up when Briggs walked Elijah in. His eyes went to Elijah's face, then to the cuffs, then away. It was practiced, the looking away. You learned it fast. Briggs dropped the intake paperwork on the counter and started filling things in. Calloway turned back to his terminal. Standard procedure on a vehicle theft. Run the plates. Check registration. Cross-reference with the registered address. Basic. First thing you do. He pulled up the database. Entered the plate number. 4 seconds. The result appeared. He read it. Looked at the screen for a moment longer than the reading required. Then he looked at Briggs, who was still writing, who had not looked up. Calloway's hand moved to the mouse, and he closed the window. The holding room had plastic chairs and fluorescent lights, and a smell that the cleaner didn't fully cover. Elijah sat down. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about his father. James Cross had been in rooms like this many times, but always as the person processing, never the person being processed. He described them to Elijah once, not their function, their design, the low ceiling, the quality of the light, the chair that didn't allow you to sit comfortably for reasons that were not accidental. It's architectural, his father had said. Everything in that room is telling you something before anyone opens their mouth. Elijah had been 19 when he heard that, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking the bad coffee his father made, because James Cross did not believe in spending money on good coffee when the work was going to be hard, regardless. 3 weeks before the shooting, he looked at the wall. He did not allow himself to spiral into the anger. Not because he didn't feel it, he felt it quickly, had felt it from the moment the cuffs clicked. But because anger was a resource and he was going to need it later, in forms that were more useful than this. His father had taught him that too. At 3:10, they gave him the phone. He dialed Audrey Zoll's number from memory. It rang twice, Cross. She picked up the way she always did, no greeting. Just his name, the way you say a name when you're already paying attention. I need you at Central Division. A beat. Why? I was arrested. Silence. Not the surprised kind, the processing kind. 3 steps ahead before she'd said another word. For what? Suspicion of vehicle theft. He paused a moment. My own vehicle. Another beat. I'm leaving now. Don't say anything to anyone. I haven't. Keep not doing that. The line cut. He put the phone down. 3:11. The thing about anger was that it wasn't useful in the way people thought it was. That was something he'd learned not from a book or a course, but from watching his father be a black man in a badge for 22 years in a city that hadn't fully decided whether to respect him or resent him. Both, usually. Depending on the day. James Cross had been angry when he was young, really angry. The kind that lives close to the surface and costs you sausages before you know you're spending them. And then he'd gotten quieter. Not defeated. His father was never defeated. But more deliberate, more careful with where he put his energy. Like a man who had decided that the resource was finite, and he wasn't going to burn it on things that didn't move. Elijah had inherited that, the deliberateness, the ability to sit in a plastic chair in a holding room and keep his face from showing the full weight of what was happening inside it. But it cost something. It always costs something. Briggs came in at 3:40. Dropped a folder on the table. Didn't sit. You want to get ahead of this? Before it goes further? Elijah looked at him. I've told you the truth from the beginning. State's attorney. He said it like a punchline he'd heard before. You know how many times someone in the back of my car has claimed to be something they're not? Run the plates, Elijah said. That's it. Run them and this is over. Briggs leaned against the wall, crossed his arms. I'll run them when I'm ready to run them. That sentence. Not we're waiting on something. Not it's in process. Not any of the dozen procedural explanations that would have made it make sense. Just I'll run them when I'm ready. The explicit, unhurried statement that the waiting was deliberate. Elijah looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Just that. Because he was his father's son. Because he had been in enough courtrooms to know when a person had made their decision, and nothing you said was going to reach past it. Because losing his composure in this room would cost him more than it would cost Briggs, and they both understood that, and only one of them was using it. Briggs left. The door closed. 3:41. Calloway walked past the holding room twice. The first time he didn't stop, just glanced through the small window in the door. Elijah was sitting with his forearms on the table, still, the stillness of someone waiting on purpose, not Zion who had given up. Calloway kept walking. The second time, he slowed. The result from the database was still with him. He hadn't looked at it again. He'd closed the window the moment he registered the name. But names stayed with you in this job. Plate numbers, case numbers, faces. They filed themselves behind your eyes and didn't ask permission. Elijah D. Cross, state's attorney for the county, registered owner of the vehicle in question. Calloway stood in the hallway outside the holding room door. Briggs was at the far end of the room talking to someone at dispatch, laughing at something. Calloway looked at the door, looked at Briggs, walked away. He told himself it wasn't his call, that Briggs was the lead officer, that stepping into another officer's arrest with 2 years on the job and Briggs's 22 years and 3 commendations and the way he talked in the break room was the kind of thing that followed you, stayed on your record in ways that weren't always written down but were always understood. He told himself these things. They were all true, and none of them were the real reason. At 3:50, the front door of Central Division opened. Audrey Walsh walked in. She was 5'4" and wore flat shoes and carried one manila folder and nothing else. And the people in that station who happened to look up when she came in would not have been able to say precisely what made them look. It wasn't volume. It wasn't any one thing. It was the way she moved through the room, like someone who had already assessed it and found it manageable. She asked for the officer handling the cross intake. She was directed to Briggs. She introduced herself. Name, bar number, relationship to the individual in holding. Said it all in the tone you'd use to read an address off an envelope. Then she opened the folder and placed a single page on the desk in front of Briggs. The official website of the state's attorney's office, staff directory. One entry highlighted in yellow, Elijah D. Cross, state's attorney, photograph, identification number, office contact. Briggs looked at it. Anyone can print something, he said. Audrey looked at him. Then she turned the page over. On the back was a timestamp visible Cephas upper right corner, 3:02 p.m. A database query from the terminal at Central Division. Plate number, vehicle registration result. Owner, Elijah D. Cross, state's attorney for the county. Your own system ran this at 3:02, Audrey said. Her voice had not changed. Still the same pace, still the same register, which somehow made it land harder than volume would have. That was 48 minutes before I walked in. Someone in this building knew exactly who was sitting in that holding room and made a choice not to act on it. She picked up the folder. That's not a mistake, she said, but a mistake is not running the plates. What this is running them, reading the result, and closing the window. Briggs said nothing. I want my client released, she said. Now. Elijah walked out of Central Division at 4:40 p.m. Audrey was beside him. She'd collected his briefcase from where he'd left it at the car. A courthouse staffer had found it on the ground and brought it to the front desk, not knowing what else to do with it. The late afternoon light was different from the light that had been there when he went in. Longer, angled differently. The day had moved without him. They walked to Audrey's car with Then Elijah said, "Did they run the plates before you got there?" Audrey looked straight ahead, didn't answer, didn't need to. He sat with that. Not the fact of it. He'd known the fact of it from the moment Briggs came back to the holding room and asked if he wanted to get ahead of this. What he was sitting with was the confirmation. The shape of it made real, they knew, not after Audrey arrived, not after she laid the page on the desk before. Some son his plates at 3 in the afternoon and read his name and his title and made a choice. And then Briggs had walked into the holding room and leaned against the wall and crossed his arms and said, I'll run them when I'm ready to run them. In the passenger seat of Audrey's car, Elijah pressed 2 fingers against the mark on his left wrist, the faint ache of it still there. He was his father's son. He thought about that. James Cross had walked into this same system every morning for 22 years and done the work, and believed the work mattered. He had been the kind of officer who showed other officers what the job could look like when you did it right. He'd mentored younger men, written recommendations, stayed past his shift because the neighborhood needed him to, and the neighborhood was why he'd taken the job in the first place. And then one afternoon, a call came in and James Cross responded, and the details after that were something Elijah had memorized, because you memorize things that change everything. You go over them until they stop feeling real and start feeling like something that happened to someone else, which is the only way to carry them. He had gone to law school the month after the funeral, not because of anger. He'd had anger, had plenty of it, but anger wasn't the reason. And the reason was that he understood something at 19, standing at the front of a church full of uniforms, that he had spent 17 years since then trying to act on. The system needed people inside it who knew what it could do and chose to do something different with it. He had been one of those people for 17 years. And today, a jury had agreed with him in 11 minutes. And an hour later, he was in a plastic chair with marks on his wrists. He looked the window as Audrey drove. The city went past. Ordinary Tuesday evening. Other people going about the things they went about. No reason any of them would know what had happened in the parking lot. No reason it would register in the ordinary movement of the day. He thought about that too. About who had sat as that holding room and didn't have what he had. Didn't have a bar number to recite. Didn't have an Audrey Walsh who answers on the second ring. Didn't have 17 years of institutional knowledge about exactly what the procedure was supposed to be and exactly where this afternoon had departed from it. What happened to them? He knew the answer. He'd been prosecuting cases long enough to know. Audrey pulled up to his building. They sat in the car for a moment. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. She kept her hands on the wheel. She knew what he needed right now, which was not a conversation. He got out, picked up his briefcase. "Audrey," she looked at him. "The person who ran the plates at 302s, he said. "Do we know yet?" "Not yet," she said. "We will." He nodded. She drove. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building for a moment. The evening coming in, the light going gold and low. A woman walked opposites with a dog, a young kid on a bicycle going too fast. The ordinary texture of a Tuesday. He went inside. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Coffee mug in the drying rack, blinds angled against the morning sun. A framed photograph on the shelf by the kitchen window, James Cross in his dress uniform, 38 years old, the same age Elijah had been, first-made state's attorney. He set his briefcase down, stood in the kitchen. He thought about Owen Holt standing in the doorway. The 2 seconds before the door closed, he thought about what that moment was, what it meant, whether it meant anything beyond what it looked like on the surface. A tired man stepping back inside at the end of a long Tuesday. A man who maybe hadn't fully processed what he was seeing in time to do anything about it. Elijah had been in enough courtrooms to know how people looked when they were processing something and how they looked when they had processed it and chosen not to act on it. He knew which one that had been. He picked up his briefcase, brought it to the table, opened it. He had 3 other cases open. One went to trial in 6 weeks. He got to work. Outside, the city went on being itself. The light changed and the traffic thinned, and the Tuesday evening did what Tuesday evenings do. And Elijah Cross sat at his father's table under his father's photograph and worked until the light was gone and the city outside was quiet and the coffee he'd made an hour in had gone cold without him noticing. He worked, because that was the first thing. Everything else was second. Audrey has had a rule about mornings. No phone before coffee. No email before the coffee was finished. No conversations requiring her full attention until she had been awake for at least 40 minutes. She broke all 3 rules the morning after Elijah's arrest. She was at her desk by 6:15. Coffee untouched. 3 windows open on her screen. The screenshot centered on her monitor like evidence at a trial, which was exactly what it was going to be. 3:02 p.m. She kept coming back to it, not because it surprised her. Audrey had been practicing law for 15 years and had stopped being surprised by what institutions did to protect themselves somewhere around year 4. What she kept coming back to was the precision, the specificity. Someone had run those plates, read the result, understood exactly what it meant, and closed the window. That was not negligent. Negligence was failing to run the plates at all. Negligence was paperwork errors and misread forms, and the thousand small failures of an overworked system grinding through more than it could handle. This was different. This was a choice made with information in hand. She picked up her coffee, cold, drank it anyway, and opened the third window, the personnel directory for Central Division, and started reading. Elijah was at his desk by 7:30. His assistant Phoebe had left a fresh cup of coffee on the corner of his desk and a neat stack of the morning's priority items without saying a word about the day before. 9 years working together. She understood what he needed in the mornings after hard days, which was not to be asked about the hard days. He had slept 4 hours. Not because sleep had failed him, but because there were things to review, and the early morning was quiet in a way the rest of the day wasn't. And there was something clarifying about working before the building filled up with people and noise and the ordinary needs of the job. He'd gone through the Delancey files, prepped the witness list for the Morrison case, drafted 2 pages of notes on a pattern he'd noticed in the Hargrove financial records that he'd meant to write up after the verdict but hadn't gotten to. Because of the parking lot. He put his pen down, picked it up. The work was the work. It didn't stop because of what happened to you. His father had worked with a hairline fracture in his wrist once, and hadn't mentioned it until 3 days later when someone noticed the way he was holding his coffee. "You show up," James Cross had said. "That's the first thing. Everything else comes after." Elijah had been showing up for 17 years, but there was also this. The marks on his wrists had faded overnight, mostly, a slight discoloration if you looked at the right angle in the right light. He was wearing long sleeves. He usually wore long sleeves. But he had thought about it when he got dressed, had been conscious of the choice in a way he wasn't usually conscious of it, and that awareness was its own kind of information. That was the particular thing about yesterday. Not the cuffs, not the holding room, or the plastic chair, or the fluorescent lights, or the specific ways Briggs's voice had done something when Elijah said his title. What stayed with him was the window. Someone had seen the truth at 3 in the afternoon and chosen to close it. And Elijah had sat in that room for almost 2 hours because of that single choice. He needed to know who. Audrey called at 8:15. "I found him," she said. "Brett Calloway, 28. 2 years at Central Division. He was the one at the terminal. You're certain. Login credentials are individual. The query at 3:02 was his. A beat. Does he know we know? Not yet." Elijah thought about that. About what kind of person runs a plate, reads the name, and closes the window. "Pull whatever you can find on Briggs," he said. "Already started. Don't go to Calloway yet. I wasn't planning to."
He hung up.
Phoebe appeared in the doorway. His 9 o'clock was in the conference room. He picked up his coffee and went to work. The thing about Raymond Briggs was that he was decorated. That was what Audrey found, working through the morning, pulling files, the way she pulled everything, methodically and without rushing. 3 commendations in 22 years. A solid arrest record on paper. A supervisor who had written him up twice for paperwork delays, and once for conduct that fell short of department standards, but had never escalated anything, had let each instance close itself and filed it and moved on. The kind of file that looked clean at a glance. The kind that looked different when you read it carefully. 3 complaints, all closed. First, 2016. A man named Arthur Denton, 34, complained that Briggs had detained him outside his own business, a dry cleaning shop on Reeder Street, for 40 minutes without cause. Briggs stated Denton was behaving suspiciously. No report was filed against Denton. The complaint was marked insufficient evidence and shelved within 3 weeks. Second, 2019. A woman named Tanya Aussie,
27,
complained that Briggs had handcuffed her on her front porch while she was taking out her recycling, claiming she matched a description. The description on file bore almost no resemblance to Aussie. The complaint was marked officer exercised reasonable judgment, closed in under 2 weeks. Third, 2021. Audrey stopped on the third one. A woman named Gloria Reeves, 63 years old at the time of the incident, 67 now. Retired schoolteacher, lived at 412 Calloway Street. Had lived there for 31 years at the time of the complaint. Briggs had cuffed her on her own front steps. The charge was suspicion of breaking and entering into her own home. She had been locked out. had gotten in through the back window, the same window she'd used a dozen times over the years when she forgot her key. A neighbor had called it in. Briggs responded, so saw a black woman climbing through a window and made a judgment before he reached the gate. Gloria Reeves had spent 4 hours in holding before her daughter arrived with documentation, proving she had owned the house since 1990. The complaint: insufficient evidence to support misconduct, closed in 10 days. One follow-up phone call from an internal affairs officer. No further contact. Audrey sat back, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then she called Elijah. He listened without interrupting. She had noticed this about him early. Most people listened with their next sentence already forming. Elijah listened the way he took a deposition. Complete, patient. No noise filling the space where the other person's words were. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. How old is she now? As he said, 67. And no one followed up after the initial call. One phone call. Nothing after. Another silence. Gloria Reeves, he said. The way he said it told her he was filing the name somewhere specific, somewhere he would find it again. I'll pull the full file this afternoon. Do that. He paused. This isn't just about me, she knew that. She'd known it the moment she'd read the third complaint. What had happened to Elijah Cross in the parking lot yesterday was the most recent version of something Briggs had been doing for years. The difference was that Elijah had 17 years of institutional knowledge and a lawyer who picked up on the second ring and a bar number he could recite from memory. Gloria Reeves had spent 4 hours in a holding room and gone home and filed a complaint that was closed in 10 days. Arthur Denton had stood outside his own business for 40 minutes. Tanya Osi had been cuffed on her front porch, taking out her recycling. All of them had said the same things Elijah had said. None of them had been heard. What do you want to do? Audrey asked. I want to talk to Chief Greer, she considered that. Not unexpected. If Elijah was trying to do something that lasted, going to the top was where you went. When? Today, this afternoon if possible. I'll set it up. Chief Harold Greer's office was on the 4th floor of Central Division. Elijah had been in it twice before. Once for a joint investigation coordination meeting. Once for something administrative he barely remembered now. Both times the room had felt exactly like what it was. The place where a man ran a department and made the decisions the department carried out. Wide room, a lot of oak, framed commendations covering most of one wall, a bookcase with procedures manuals, and a few hardcovers that had been there long enough to fade on the spines. And behind the desk, a photograph. 2 men in dress uniforms, formal setting, the kind of photograph that said longevity. Elijah recognized one of the faces before he sat down. That down did not say anything about it. Greer was 58, gray at the temples, the rest still brown. He'd was in department for 6 years. Before that, over 2 decades on the force. He'd worked the East Side early in his career, back when the East Side was a different place than it was now, harder and less visible and full of people who needed things the city was not particularly focused on providing. He shook Elijah's hand, firm, brief, the handshake of a man who had done it to 50 teams a day for years. He gestured to the chair across the desk. I'm expecting you. Elijah sat. Audrey sat beside him. I imagine you have, Elijah said. Greer placed his hands flat on the desk, large hands. The hands of a man who had done physical work for a long time before he started doing work. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, Greer said. I want to say that plainly and first. TK. Officer Briggs will face a full internal review. I've already initiated it. That's a start. Greer looked at him, taking his measure, trying to read how angry he was, what he wanted, which direction this conversation was moving. What else do you need, counselor? Elijah leaned forward slightly.
I need you to understand that this conversation isn't about what happened to me,
he said. What happened to me is the part you already know. What I'm here to discuss is the part you may not be looking at yet. He laid out the 3 complaints. Arthur Denton, Tanya Ose, Gloria Reeves, no notes. He'd read the files twice that morning and could hold the relevant details in order without them. Greer listened. His face stayed level, but his hands moved, barely, a slight shift in how they rested on the desk, and Elijah watched that more than the face. When Elijah finished, Greer was quiet. Those complaints were reviewed and closed, he said. Careful, deliberate. They were closed, Elijah says. I'm less certain they were reviewed. A beat. That's a serious thing to say. It's a serious pattern. Greer looked at the desk surface, then back up. I know you, he said. The turn was abrupt. Elijah hadn't expected it. We've met twice, Elijah said. We've met twice, agreed, but I knew your father. The room went quiet in a particular way. Elijah kept his expression even. He was a good officer. Greer said, not as flattery as fact, plain and without decoration. I worked the east side with him, 97, 98. He had a way of doing this job that I haven't seen often since. He paused. I was at his service. Elijah knew. He'd been 19, standing at the front of a church that held more uniforms than civilians, looking at rows of faces without registering names, and he might have seen Greer without knowing which face belonged to which name. I know, Elijah said. Greer nodded, looked at his hands. I'll open a full review of all 3 complaints, he said, and I'll review the events of yesterday in that context. He looked up again. But I need you to hear something. His voice shifted slightly, not harder or older. I run 900 people. The problems you're describing, I know they exist. I have known. And I work within a structure that doesn't always make moving on them simple or fast. I understand that, Elijah said. I also work within a structure that makes things complicated. I do them anyway. A long pause. Something sex moved in Greer's face. Recognition, or the older thing that recognition sometimes turns into. I'll be in touch, he said. They were back in Audrey's car before she said anything. He knew your father. Yes. Is that going to be a problem? Elijah thought about the photograph behind Greer's desks. The 2 men in dress uniforms. He hadn't been able to make out the second face clearly from where he was sitting, but the build and the way the man stood had told him something. Not a problem, he said, but it's going to be complicated. Audrey pulled out of the parking structure into the afternoon traffic, the city moving in its ordinary way. He'll try to protect the department, he said, dead, analytical, not accusatory. He'll try to do both, Elijah said, protect it and do the right thing. He's been balancing those 2 things for a long time. The question is what happens when they pull in different directions hard enough that he can't hold both. And if he chooses wrong, then we'll have a different conversation. He went to see Gloria Reeves that evening. He had not told Audrey. He'd thought about it through the afternoon, in the gaps between meetings and the 20 minutes when he was supposed to be reviewing the Morrison witness list, and kept finding himself reading the same sentence twice without taking it in. By 5 o'clock, the decision had made itself. He drove to 412 Callaway Street, a row house, narrow, well kept in the way that takes consistent attention rather than money, because you can see the difference between those 2 things in the small choices. The front steps were clean, 2 potted plants flanking the door, a small flag on a bracket by the mailbox. He sat in the car. He was not sure exactly what he was doing here. He had no legal standing to be here. Gloria Reeves's complaint was 4 years closed. He had not been part of the process that closed it, but she had sat in the same plastic chair, in the same building, under the same lights, with the same officer's name on the paperwork, and she had gone home and filed a complaint and been told it was insufficient and gone on with her life, because what else do you do when the system tells you there is nothing to find? He got out of the car. She answered on the second knock. Gloria Reeves was 67, small, but the way she stood adjusted that impression immediately. Straight-backed, chin level, reading glasses on top of her head, a book in her left hand, thumb holding her. She looked at him. He held up his credentials. Mrs. Reeves, my name is Elijah Cross. I'm the state's attorney for this county. I'm sorry to come without calling first. I can come back if this isn't a good time. She looked at the credentials, then at him. I know who you are, she said. I read the paper. She studied him a moment longer. You were the one they arrested yesterday. Yes, ma'am. She held the door open wider. Come in. The living room was a reader's room, books on every surface organized in a system that made sense to her. A television in the corner, off. A ceramic lamp that had been there since before the potted plants outside were planted. The specific stillness of a room that had been lived in carefully for a long time. She sat in the armchair. He sat on the couch. She did not offer him anything. She was making an assessment first, and she was going to take the time she needed to make it. You're here about what happened to me, she said. Not a question. I read your complaint from 21, he said. I'd like to hear it from you, if you're willing. She looked at him steadily. Her thumb moved against the book spine, the habit of someone who needed something in their hands while they were thinking. I locked myself out, she said. I'd done it before. There's a window in the back. The latch has always been loose. I've used it a dozen times over the years. I'd been maybe 5 minutes when I heard knocking. She did not look away from him. He had his hands on his belt before I finished opening the door. Elijah nodded. Let her set the pace. I told him my name. He asked for ID. I said it was just inside. I could get it. It was right there on the table by the door. She paused. He told me to stop moving. The room was quiet. I've lived in this house for 31 years, she said. I know every person on this street. I planted those, she gestured toward the window, and the steps beyond it, 12 years ago. And I stood in my own hallway while a man told me to stop moving. She said it without visible anger on the surface. But it was there underneath. Elijah could feel it. She'd carried it long enough that it no longer needed to live where anyone could see it. It had become part of the structure of how she held herself. He recognized that. The complaint was closed in 10 days, he said. Yes. Did anyone follow up after the initial call? One woman called. From Internal Affairs. She asked me to describe the incident. I described it. She said she'd be in touch. A pause. She wasn't. Elijah looked at his hands for a moment. Mrs. Reeves, he said. I want to be honest with you about why I came. I wish you would. What happened to me yesterday is connected to what happened to you 4 years ago. Same officer, same pattern. It's the same decision getting made before anyone opens their mouth. He looked at her. I'm going to push for a full review. I think this time it's going to happen. But I wanted to talk to you before any of that moved forward. Because it's your story too, and you deserve to know what's being done with it. She watched him without speaking. What do you want from me? She said finally. Nothing you're not willing to give, he said. Your complaint is on record. I may need to reference it. But I'm not here to ask you to go through something you've already been through once without anyone listening. A long silence. Gloria Reeves set her book down on the arm of the chair, both hands free. He looked at me, she said, the way you look at something that doesn't belong where it is. She paused. I was 63 years old. I'd had 600 children come through my classroom over 32 years. I was standing in my own hallway. She stopped. I just wanted someone official to look me in the eye, she said. That's all I wanted. Someone who had the authority to do something, to say they heard me, that what happened was wrong. No one did that. No one did that. Elijah sat with that for a moment. Then he said, I hear you. She looked at him. What happened to you was wrong, he said. I'm not telling you that fixes anything. I know it doesn't. But I wanted you to hear it from someone who should have said it sooner. The room held the silence. Gloria Reeves looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once? Small. The kind of nod that doesn't mean gratitude, exactly, but means received. Means I will keep this. He drove home in the dark. The city moved around him, and he moved through it thinking about his father in the particular way he thought about him, when something large had happened, and he needed to understand where it fit. James Cross had worked the east side, had driven those streets, might have been on Callaway Street once, responding to something, might have walked past the number 412 and handled whatever he found there the way James Cross handled things, which was carefully and with the specific respect of a man who understood that the people in those houses were the reason he had the job. And then James was gone, and the institution kept moving, and somewhere in the years Raymond Briggs had stood on that same street and made a different kind of choice. The institution was not the people in it. That was the thing his father had never fully resolved, whether you could separate those two things, whether the begin with you were to survive contact with 2 decades of a job that rewarded a particular kind of certainty and made hesitation feel like weakness. Elijah didn't know the answer. He was working toward one. Audrey called at 9:40. He stood at the kitchen table, files open, coffee on the counter that he'd poured an hour ago and not touched. Greer's office called, she said. They want a formal meeting tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. What's the scope? Internal review of yesterday's incident and, a brief pause, associated complaints. Associated complaints. He'd moved on all 3. All right, Elijah said. There's something else. The shift in her voice he knew. The tone, the schmaz, she was to say something he wasn't going to like. Tell me. The department's legal counsel called our office at 6:30 this evening. After hours. What did they want? They were asking whether we intended to file a civil complaint, and the way they were asking suggested they would prefer to know before we'd decided. Elijah was quiet a moment. "They're managing the exposure," he said, trying to. "Greer told them about our meeting." Yes, he thought about Greer, and the photograph, and the firm handshake, and the way he'd said your father would have handled this differently, in a tone that wasn't quite accusation and wasn't apology. "Let them sit with it," Elijah said. "We'll see what the meeting looks like. Oh my God. And if it looks like liability management rather than actual accountability, then we have a different conversation." He hung up. The files were still on the table. Morrison case, 6 weeks to trial. A suppression motion the defense had filed yesterday morning, before the parking lot, in what felt now like a different version of the same day. He picked up the motion, read the first page, put it down, picked up his phone and dialed a number he memorized so long ago it was part of him. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, sleep soft, but alert the way it always became the moment she heard his voice. Elijah, his mother, just his name, carrying everything a name carries when a woman has said it 10,000 times. "Hey, Mom, I've been waiting." "I know, I'm sorry. Are you all right?" He looked at the photograph on the shelf, his father in the dress uniform, 38 years old. The age Elijah had the first time he was sworn in as state's attorney. "I'm working on it," he said, a pause. "Your father used to say that," she said. "When things were hard, when he didn't have anything better to say." "I know. He meant it every single time he said it." "I know that, too." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the house around her through the phone, the particular silence of a place that had held a family and then kept holding it even after the family changed shape. "Come for dinner Sunday," she said. "I'll try. Don't try. Just come." He almost smiled. "Okay," he said. "I'll come." After he hung up, he sat at the table for a while without opening anything. He thought about Brett Calloway, about a 28-year-old at a terminal at 3 in the afternoon. The 4 seconds the database took to return a result. The name appearing on the screen, the moment of reading it, the moment of looking at Briggs across the room, the window closing. He had been working through what kind of person did that. What kept it coming back to was that it wasn't a simple answer. Bad people were easier. You built a case. You proved to 12 people what they'd done and let the verdict do its work. Calloway had made a scared person's choice. Someone who had looked at the result and looked at a man with 22 years and 3 commendations and calculated the cost and decided that the cost of speaking up was more than he was willing to pay that afternoon. Elijah had been making hard calculations his whole life. He understood the arithmetic. He did not accept the answer Calloway had arrived at, but he understood how someone got there. He closed the Morrison files, stood at the kitchen window the way he stood there in the mornings, looking at the street below, the streetlights, and the quiet of the city at night, the few people still moving through it. His father had stood at this window. He stood at it now. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock he would find out what Harold Greer had decided to do with the balance he was trying to maintain. Whether the thing Greer was trying to protect was actually worth protecting, or whether it was just the thing that was easiest to hold on to. He would find out, and then he would decide what came next. He went to bed, lay in the dark. Outside, the city was quiet and ongoing and full of people who had made choices today and would make different ones tomorrow and would live inside the consequences of both for longer than they expected. He closed his eyes and slept. The conference room on the 4th floor of Central Division had a long table and 8 chairs and a window that looked out over the parking structure. Elijah noticed the window first, not the table, not Greer standing at the far end with his hands clasped, not the 2 men from the department's legal counsel sitting to the left with matching portfolios and their expressions of careful neutrality. The window. From where he stood, he could see the public lot 3 floors down. 3rd row. The exact space where he'd parked 2 days ago, where he'd leaned into his car looking for a wallet, and Raymond Briggs had opened a patrol unit door and walked across the asphalt with his hand near his belt and his mind already made up. He looked at it for a moment. Then he sat down. Audrey sat beside him. She'd brought 2 folders, thin ones, because she didn't need thick folders to perform preparation. She was prepared, had been since before 6 that morning, and the folders were there because institutions responded to the visual language of documentation. Greer sat. The legal counsel straightened. "Thank you for coming in," Greer said. "Thank you for the meeting," Elijah said. pleasantries. The kind that were both sides confirming they understood what was at stake before anyone said anything that mattered. Greer went through it methodically. Raymond Briggs had been placed on administrative suspension pending formal review. The three prior complaints, Denton, Osei, Reeves, had been reopened and assigned to an independent investigator rather than internal affairs. The terminal log showing the 302 query had been preserved and would be part of the formal record. He said all of this in the even voice of a man who had practiced it and was delivering it close to how he'd practiced. Elijah listened. When Greer finished, the room held a particular quiet. "Who ran the query?" Elijah said. The legal counsel shifted, barely. The kind of small movement that happens when a question lands exactly where a person was hoping it wouldn't. Greer held his gaze. "That's part of the ongoing review," he said. "I know who it was," Elijah said. "I'm asking whether you do. A beat." "We have the log," Greer said. "Then you know." Elijah leaned forward slightly. "Chief Greer, I'm not here to create problems. I'm here because the problems already exist and someone needs to be honest about what they are. An officer ran my plates, identified me correctly, and closed the window. He made that choice because the culture in that station told him that going against a senior officer cost more than staying quiet. He let that sit for a moment. That culture didn't develop in 2 days, he said, and it won't fix itself." Greer looked at him. The expression Elijah had been watching for, the one that tell him which way this was going to fall, was not defensiveness. It was older than that. The face of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had just been told he no longer had the option of carrying it quietly. "No," Greer said. "It won't." The formal part of the meeting lasted 40 minutes. Legal counsel spoke twice, both times asking procedural questions that were really ways of slowing the room down and measuring exposure. Audrey answered both in 3 sentences each. The way she answered things when she wanted the other side to understand, she had anticipated the question before they asked it. At the end, Greer looked at the counsel and then at Audrey. 5 minutes, he said. "Just us." Audrey collected both folders and walked out without a word. The legal counsel looked at each other, then at Greer, then filed out behind her. The door closed. Greer and Elijah, the window, the parking structure. 3rd row. "Your father and I worked together for 2 years, Greer said. He hadn't sat back down. He moved toward the window, stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the same thing Elijah had looked at when he walked in. East Side, 97 and 98. You wouldn't have known about most of it. You were young. He talked about that period, Elijah said. Not often. It was a hard 2 years. Greer's voice had changed register. Not softer exactly, more careful. A lot of pressure. A lot of calls that didn't have clean answers. Moments where you had to decide fast what kind of officer you looked out when to be. James always knew, he said. I used to watch him work a scene, and he'd already figured out the right thing before the rest of us had even processed what we were looking at. It wasn't speed. He wasn't reckless. He was just clear. He knew what he was there for. Elijah said nothing. I knew who you were, Greer said. The moment your name came to my office the day before yesterday, I recognized it. He turned from the window. And I have been asking myself, since that afternoon, what James would say if he knew his son had sat in one of my holding rooms for 2 hours. He said it directly, no cushioning around it. I think he'd be angry, Elijah said. I think he'd be angry at me specifically. Yes, Elijah said, he would. Greer nodded. The nod of a man receiving something he had earned and was not going to argue against. I should have caught this sooner, he said. The pattern with Briggs. The complaints going back years. I should have. He stopped, started again. The structure of this department makes it easy not to look at certain things, not because anyone decides to look away, because the looking takes time that no one allocates, and the things no one looks at accumulate. I know, Elijah said. I've been on the other side of that accumulation for 17 years. I imagine you have. A silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The kind that happens when 2 people have said the true thing and don't need to cover it with more words. What do you need from me? Greer asked. I need you to do what you said you'd do, Elijah said. Fully, not the version that manages the liability. The actual version. Greer looked at him steadily. And if those turn out to be different things? Then I come back, Elijah said. And we have a harder conversation. The review board met in a room on the 2nd floor morning, smaller than the 4th floor conference room, 5 people at the table. 3 internal investigators, a union representative, a civilian oversight member. Elijah was not there. This was not his proceeding. He would receive the record afterward. He heard about it from Audrey, who had a source, who described it the way people describe things that leave a mark before they've fully processed what they witnessed. Brett Calloway walked in at 9:02. No representation. He'd waved it. Blue uniform. The same one he'd been wearing 2 days ago. He sat down. The lead investigator went through the standard language, the rights, the scope, the process. Calloway listened, nodded when asked if he understood. Then she asked him to describe his actions on Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 5 p.m. And Calloway talked. He started at the beginning, his shift, his desk assignment. Briggs walking Elijah in. He said the word suspect, and then stopped and corrected himself, said Mr. Cross. He described pulling up the database. He described running the plate number. He described the result appearing on screen. He said the name out loud in the room. Isaiah D. Cross, state's attorney. He said he had looked at the screen for 3 or 4 seconds. Then he said he had looked across the room at Briggs, who was filling out intake paperwork, and had not looked up. Then he said what he had done. Close the window. He said it without that looking away from the investigators, that without softening language people reach for when they are confessing something and want the shape of it to come out smaller than it actually is. He said it the way you say something when you have decided that the saying of it matters more than what it costs you. The room was quiet. The investigator asked why. Calloway took a moment. Because Briggs had been clear, he said, about what to happen to officers who went against him. He described it without drama. 3 instances in the 2 years he'd been at Central Division. 2 other junior officers, one of whom had been transferred to a punishing assignment that within weeks of contradicting Briggs in front of a supervisor. One who had simply stopped advancing despite a record that should have moved him forward. And something Briggs had said directly to Calloway in the break room 4 months before Tuesday. You don't go against your partner, ever. Not a threat in the explicit sense. The kind of statement that lives in the space between advice and warning and doesn't need to be either one way work. Calloway had understood what it meant, and at 3:02 on Tuesday afternoon, with the name on his screen and Briggs 10 feet away, he had acted accordingly. The investigator asked whether he understood the consequences of his statement today. Calloway said yes. She asked whether he wished to reconsider waiving representation. He said no. Then she asked what had changed between Tuesday afternoon and this morning. Calloway was quiet longer than he'd been quiet for other question. Then he said, I kept thinking about him, sitting in that room, knowing his name was on my screen, and me 20 feet away doing nothing about it. He paused. That's not the kind of officer I came here to be. Elijah read the summary that afternoon. Audrey had gotten a typed account through proper channels, close enough to the record to carry what mattered. He read it twice. Then he sat at his desk for a while and did not open anything else. 28 years old, 2 years on the job. Walking into a room without a lawyer and making a statement that was going to follow him professionally, possibly in both directions at once. The thing that closed one path and opened another, or just the thing that closed one path. He didn't know yet which way it would fall for Calloway, but he understood what the statement meant beyond Calloway's career. Because Calloway had not only confirmed the 3:02 window, he had described a climate. A pattern of behavior Briggs had maintained deliberately over years, not just the choices he made in parking lots and on front porches. The internal structure he'd built around himself, the understood cost of contradicting him. The way that cost had been demonstrated often enough that it didn't need to be restated. It just lived in the room whenever Briggs was in the room. That was the piece Elijah hadn't had before. He'd had the 3 complaints, the paper record of what Briggs had done outside the station. Calloway had given him the inside account of how Briggs had made sure the station wouldn't stop him. Raymond Briggs was terminated on Thursday. The formal decision came from Greer's office at 2:15 in the afternoon. 1 paragraph. The language of institutional action. Sustained conduct unbecoming an officer. Violation of department policy. Failure to meet professional standards. Elijah was in a deposition when Audrey's message came through. He finished the deposition, walked back to his office, sat at his desk. He had expected something cleaner. Some version of the feeling that came when a verdict landed right, that specific click of a thing resolved. But the termination was one paragraph, and Raymond Briggs was 51 years old. Somewhere in this city, Arthur Denton had gone to work this morning, without knowing anything had changed, and Tanya Osei had taken out her recycling, and Gloria Reeves had sat in her armchair with her book. None of them had received a phone call. The thing that ended for Briggs today had started for them years ago, and a paragraph in a personnel file did not reach backward. He sat with that for a long time. Then he called Audrey. "I want to go see her again," he said. She knew immediately who he meant. "Tonight? If she's willing, I'll call." Gloria Reeves was willing. The plants were squilted on the front steps, the flag by the mailbox. The door opened on the second knock. She looked at him, then past him at the empty street. "You came alone again," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She held the door open. The living room was the same. Books on every surface, the ceramic lamp, the armchair. He took the same spot on the couch, and she took the chair, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which felt appropriate, given what they were both carrying into the room. "He was terminated today," Elijah said. She looked at him steadily. "I saw it. The evening news had a line about it." "Yes." She was quiet. He did not try to fill it with anything. "I'm glad," she said finally. "But I want to be honest with you, because you've been honest with me. I've been sitting with what glad means, whether it's the right word for what I feel." She looked at her hands. "He's gone from the job. But the morning it happened to me is still the morning it happened to me. That part doesn't move." "No," Elijah said. "It doesn't." "That's the thing no one says out loud. There usually is." "Probably," he said. He was not going to pretend otherwise. "That's the harder problem. The one that takes longer." She nodded. She's not resigned. Clear-eyed, with the speaking for a moment. Ella said, "So I want to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever you say, I'll respect it, and I'll work within it." She looked at him and waited. "Chief Greer was your father's colleague," he said. "He's been running this department for 6 years. Under his supervision, your complaint was closed in 10 days with one phone call and no follow-up. I believe there is a post holding him accountable for that failure. I have enough to push for a formal accountability proceeding." He paused. "But your complaint is part of that case. Your story is part of it. That means you become part of what follows. The attention, the process. Being asked to describe what happened to you in official rooms in front of people with clipboards again." He looked at her directly. "If you don't want that, I'll find another path. I'll work with what I have without pulling you further into it." Gloria Reeves was quiet for a long time. The lamp, the sounds of the street outside, faint. "How old is he?" she asked. Greer, 58. She sat with that. "I'm 67, she said. "I have been dealing with variations of this situation my whole life. Not always this specific, but this shape." She paused. "I'm tired, Mr. Cross. I don't mean that I've given up. I mean, I have genuinely used a great deal of energy on this particular thing for 4 years, and I do not want to spend more of it sitting in official rooms." She looked at him. "What I want," she said, "is what I told you the other day. Someone who had the authority to stop this and didn't, to come here, to this house, to sit where you're sitting, and to say it to my face." She paused. "Not in a statement, not in a press conference. Just here, just that." Elijah looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. "You think he'll do it?" "I'm going to give him the choice," Elijah said. "What he does with it will tell me what I need to know." She nodded, set her book on the arm of the chair, both hands free. "Then ask him," she said. He went to Greer the next morning. No Audrey, no folders, no appointment. He walked into the building at 8:40 and told Greer's assistant he would wait and sat in the chair by the door until the light on the phone console went dark. Then he walked in. Greer looked up. He didn't look surprised. Maybe he'd been expecting this. Cross, Chief. Elijah sat down. He looked at the photograph behind Greer's shoulder. 2 men in dress uniforms. From this angle, this distance, he could see the second face fully. James Cross, 38 years old, standing straight with his hat tucked under his arm, looking at the camera in the way he looked at things, directly and without performance. Elijah looked at the photograph for one moment, then at Greer. "I'm not here about the termination," he said. "That's done. Then what?" Gloria Reeves. Greer's hands, which had been moving toward a pen on his desk, went still. "Her complaint was under your supervision," Elijah said. "Closed in 10 days. 1 phone call. No follow-up contact. You had access to Briggs' complaint history. The pattern was documented. You had both the authority and the information to act on it 4 years ago, and the matter was filed and forgotten. I have enough to take this further, he said. A formal accountability proceeding. I think you know I do. Greer looked at him. His hands stayed still on the desk. Are you going to? He said. Greer waited. She doesn't want a proceeding, Elijah said. She's 67 years old, and she's tired in the specific way people get tired when they've been fighting the same thing for a long time with nothing to show for it. She doesn't want to sit in another official room and go through it again in front of more people with clipboards. He looked at Greer steadily. She wants you to go to her house, he said. Sit down, look at her, and say you're sorry. No press, no cameras, no statement for the record, no one else in the room. Just you and her, and something that should have happened 4 years ago. The room was very quiet. Greer looked at the desk, not the expression of a man calculating political cost. Something older than that. The expression of a man who had been running an accounting in the back of his mind for a long time and had just been handed the final number. She lives on Calloway Street, Greer said. Not a question. He'd read the file. 30 years in that house, Elijah said. She plants sauerkraut on her front steps herself. She knows every neighbor by name. Greer was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the city was doing what it did. Ordinary Friday morning, people going to work, traffic moving, the sky flat and white with the particular light of late summer burning toward fall. I'll go Sunday, Greer said. She'll be home. You already spoke with her. I told her someone might come, Elijah said. I don't make promises I can't keep. Greer looked at him, and something in his face shifted, not quite relief, but the thing that happens to a person who has been bracing against something for a long time and is finally allowed to put it down. The particular exhaustion of tension released. Your father, he said. He would have done the same thing. My father would have been considerably angrier, Elijah said. Yes, Greer said. He would have been. But he would have done this. Elijah stood, because he understood that the point was never the anger. The anger was just what it felt like to care. The point was what you built after. He left. Gloria Reeves called on Monday morning. Elijah didn't recognize the number at first. She had looked up his office line through the county directory, she explained, which anyone could do. When he heard her voice, he felt something in his chest settle that he hadn't realized was unsettled. He came, she said. I know. He sat in that chair. A pause. He had trouble starting. I think he'd prepared something, and then when he was actually sitting there, it didn't come out the way he'd prepared it. Elijah waited. He said he was sorry, she said. He said he should have made sure my complaint was handled properly, and it wasn't, and that was on him. He said it, and he looked at me when he said it. Another pause. He said my name, Mrs. Reeves, like I was a person he was talking to and not a situation he was managing. Elijah didn't say anything. I didn't forgive him, she said. I want you to know that. I don't think I'm there yet. Maybe I won't get there. That's my business to figure out. She paused, but I told him I heard him, that it mattered that he came. It does matter, Elijah said. I know it does. That's why I'm calling you. Because it happened because of you, and I thought you deserved to know. He was at his kitchen table, morning light coming in level and even. His father's photograph on the shelf by the window. Coffee in the mug, still warm. Thank you for calling, he said. Thank you for the first visit, she said. When you came and you listened, that was the beginning of it. After he hung up, he sat at the table for a while, not working, just sitting. He thought about what she'd said, about the beginning of it, about how things begin, the specific moments that turn out to be the hinge points, the small choices that become large ones in retrospect. He had gone to her house on a Thursday evening because he couldn't not go, because she had sat in the same chair in the same little building and no one had listened. And he had the person who read her file on a Wednesday morning and couldn't put it back down the same way he'd picked it up. That was the whole origin of it. Someone who couldn't not go. He thought about what that meant. About how many situations like hers existed without anyone who couldn't not go. Without the specific chain of events, the one parking lot on one Tuesday afternoon. The one case that brought the right person to the right file at the right moment. Most of them didn't have that chain. Most of them just had the plastic chair and the fluorescent lights and the one phone call from internal affairs that didn't lead to another. He picked up his coffee, drank it. Then he opened a fresh legal pad and started writing. The Cross Initiative was Audrey's name for it. She said it 3 weeks after the termination, over coffee at the diner, 2 blocks from the office, where they had been having working lunches for 9 years. She said it in the middle of a sentence as about something else, the way she said things she had been thinking about for a while, and had finally decided to say. "You should formalize it," she said. "Formalize what? What you're already doing." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "People call you, Elijah. They find your number through the county directory, or they show up at the public counter and ask for the state's attorney. And half the time it's something outside your technical jurisdiction, and you do it anyway because no one else is doing it." He didn't argue with that. "There should be a structure," she said, though. "Something people can find without needing to know your name first. Something that doesn't depend on a neighbor's cousin mentioning it to the right person on the right day." He thought about Gloria Reeves looking up his number in the county directory. He thought about the chain that had gotten her there. How long it was. How many links could have been missing? "What would it look like?" he asked. Audrey set down her cup. "Legal intake for civilians in disputes with law enforcement. Free consultation in referral to pro bono representation. A documented record of what's reported and what's the doubt about, so things can't be shelved and marked insufficient and forgotten in 10 days. That's a significant operation." "You start small," she said. "You build." He looked at her. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Several months," she said. "I was waiting for the right moment." He was quiet, looking at the table, at the coffee, at nothing in particular. "My father's name," he said. She looked at him as if it was something real, if it gets off the ground, and keeps going. He looked up. "It should carry his name. He spent 22 years doing the work that made this possible. He ought to be part of what comes from it." Audrey looked at him for a moment without saying anything. "The Cross Initiative," she said. "Yes." She won the nod of a person who has been waiting to hear the right answer and has just heard it. "Then let's build it," she said. Brett Calloway applied to the Civilian Oversight Office 4 weeks after the formal review concluded. Elijah heard about it incidentally, from someone on the Oversight Board, mentioned in the middle of a coordination call about something unrelated. Calloway had submitted his application 3 days after the proceeding closed. His personnel file from Central Division would follow him, as it always did. But the Oversight Office was looking for something different than what a personnel file usually measured. The application included a personal statement. Elijah did not ask to read it. It wasn't his business. But the person on the call mentioned one line Calloway had written, and Elijah's on it turned it over in his mind for the rest of the day and into the evening. Calloway had written that he had made a choice on a Tuesday afternoon that showed him something about the kind of officer he had been becoming, and that he intended to spend the rest of his career making a different kind of choice. Elijah wrote the letter of recommendation that afternoon, 1 page. He said that he knew firsthand what Brett Calloway had done on Tuesday, September 12th at 3:02 in the afternoon. He said he also knew what Calloway had done on Thursday morning in a room without a lawyer, making a statement that cost him something real. He said that in 17 years of working inside the justice system, the quality he had found most rare and most necessary was not intelligence or skill or even integrity in the abstract. It was the willingness to correct yourself. Out loud, when it counted. He signed the letter and sent it before he could think better of sending it. 6 weeks after the arrest, Elijah won the Morrison case. The jury was out for 3 hours. He was at his desk when the clerk's office called. He thanked them, hung up, and went back to the notes he was making for the case after Morrison. Phoebe knocked. "Congratulations. Thank you." She stood in the doorway for a moment in the way she did when she was reading him. "Morrison family," he said. "Send something appropriate. I'll sign whatever you choose." He worked until 7, drove home, stood at the kitchen window for a few minutes before he turned on any lights, looking at the street below, the ordinary evening traffic of the neighborhood. Light going on in windows across the way. His father had stood at this window. He stood at it now. He thought about the past 6 weeks, not as a narrative, not in the way you shape things into stories with clear arcs and satisfying endpoints, just as a sequence of the parking lot, the holding room, Audrey's car, Gloria Reeves's living room, Greer's office, the deposition where Calloway's words landed in the room and changed the air. The Monday morning phone call from a woman who had waited 4 years for someone to look her in the eye. None of it was finished. The Cross Initiative's 2 desks in a shared legal services building on Fenwick Street. Small, provisional. Not yet what it needed to be, but it existed. And people were finding it. And last week, a man named Douglas Hale had come in and described being detained outside a pharmacy for 90 minutes by an officer who did not believe the medication in his bag was prescribed to him. It was prescribed to him. He had the bottle. He had shown it. The officer had taken it from his hand and looked at, and decided the name might not belong to the man holding it. 90 minutes. In front of a pharmacy he used every week. Douglas Hale had found out about the intake office from a coworker who had seen a flyer. He had taken the bus across town on a Thursday afternoon and sat down with a law student on pro bono rotation and told the story to someone who wrote it down and flagged it and made sure for it went somewhere. Elijah had read the intake summary the next morning. He'd thought about it all day, about the flyer, about the coworker who had seen it, about the bus across town, about how many Douglas Hales there were who hadn't seen a flyer, who didn't have a coworker who mentioned it, who had gone home after 90 minutes outside a pharmacy and absorbed the experience into the accumulation of things you absorbed and kept moving, because what else do you do? He turned from the window, sat at the table, opened the folder he had been building for 2 weeks. Expansion, 3 desks, a dedicated intake line, a formal partnership with the law school that structured the pro bono rotation and gave students supervised hours toward their requirements. He had been building the budget for it in the margins of his regular work. Quietly, without announcing it, he picked up his pen, kept building. His mother made pot roast on Sunday. She ate it every time he came for dinner because it had been James Cross's favorite and had become, by way of that, something between tradition and memorial. The apartment smelled the way it had always smelled, the pot roast and the particular soap she used, and the old wood of furniture that had been there long enough to belong to the walls. She did not ask about the cases, her rule. Sunday dinners were not for cases. It had been her rule for 30 years, and she had enforced it without exception. They ate. She asked about Audrey, whom she liked and had liked since meeting her at a department function years ago. He said Audrey was well. She asked about the Morrison verdict, which she'd read about in the paper. He said he'd sent something to the family. She refilled his glass without asking. After dinner, he sat in the living room while she made coffee. Her apartment had its own version of the photograph, larger than his, in a frame that had been repaired twice, and showed it. His father, the same age, the same uniform, looking at the same camera. She brought the coffee in and settled into her chair across from him. Looked at him in the way she had been looking at him since he was a child, the look that meant she was reading past what he was practicing. "You look better than you did," she said. "Then when? 3 weeks ago. When you came and you were being very careful about what you showed me." He looked at the photograph. "Something got resolved," he said. "Not everything, but something." She held her coffee. "Tell me." So he told her. Not the legal mechanics of it, the shape of it. Gloria Reeves in the armchair with her book and her 31 years on Callaway Street, and the way she had said she just wanted someone to look her in the eye. Greer sitting in that chair on a Sunday. The phone call on Monday morning. His mother listened the way she listened, completely, without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would have done exactly that. I know you know. I'm saying it because it matters that you know." She looked at him steadily. He didn't do the work for the credit. He didn't do it because it was easy or because it always came out right. He did it because he did not do it, because he was built in a way that made looking away feel worse than whatever it cost to look. She paused. "You're built the same way," she said. "You always have been, even when you were small." He looked at the photograph. His father at 38, the age Elijah had been when he was first sworn in. Standing straight, looking directly at the camera without expression, the way James Cross looked at things he was taking seriously. "The Cross Initiative," Elijah said. His mother raised her eyebrows slightly. "That's what we're calling it," he said. "The intake office. It's going to grow into something. Legal support for people who don't have what I have when they're sitting in those rooms." She was quiet for a moment. "His name on it," she said. "Yes." She looked at the photograph, her hands around the coffee cup. He would have argued with you about that, she said. He never liked attention on himself. I know, but he would have been proud. She looked back at Elijah. Not of the name, of the reason for it. He nodded. She patted his hand once, brief, the gesture she'd been making since he was 9 years old. Drink your coffee, she said. It's good tonight. He drank it. It was. On a Thursday in October, Elijah Cross left his apartment at 6:50. He stopped at the coffee counter on the way, paid with his wallet, which he had found himself the evening he was released, searching the car one more time before driving home, handing it under the seat in the dirt, exactly where he'd been looking before Raymond Briggs had walked across the asphalt toward him. It had been there the whole time. He took his coffee and walked to the courthouse. The morning was clear. Cool now, the particular quality of October light that is honest in a way some light isn't, low and district, showing things plainly. Other people on off the sidewalk heading toward their own mornings, the city doing what it did. He walked up the courthouse steps, through the main entrance, up to his floor. Phoebe wasn't in yet. The office held the quiet of early mornings in institutional buildings, the hum of systems running through the night and the stillness of everything waiting for the people who gave it purpose. He sat at his desk, the stack of files in priority order, a letter from the law school's pro bono coordinator, which he'd opened yesterday and read twice. The law school was in. The formal partnership, the structured rotation, the 3 additional decks on Fenwick Street. It was going to happen. He set the letter on the corner of the desk where he would see it. Opened the Morrison follow-up. Worked. Outside the window, the city was coming into its morning. Lights going on in other buildings. Traffic beginning to move. A woman on the sidewalk below, walking fast, coffee in hand, late for something. A man sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper, unhurried, in no particular rush to be anywhere. Ordinary people, making ordinary choices in an ordinary morning that was, like every morning, full of the moments that accumulated into something larger, without anyone declaring that they were doing so. Elijah worked. The coffee went cold on the corner of the desk. He didn't notice. He was already into the next thing, and the thing after that, and the long work of the day that was only the latest in a sequence of days, each one its small piece of something he was built way his father had built things, without ceremony, without waiting to be seen doing it. Just showing up. Just doing the work. Because that was the first thing, and everything else came after.